run through just a couple of logistics things that you guys have probably already seen. Again, thank you for coming to the M365 Admin Workshop Day. If you want to follow us on Twitter at O365MN, that would be great. Retweet the hashtag, get some publicity for the user group, and support the community. Again, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute yourself when the presentation starts. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and Kent is going to be taking 3 or 4 breaks through his presentation in natural places, and he will answer some questions then, and then we can have a Q&A at the end if needed. Live captioning is available for this in the upper right-hand side 3-dot ellipsis. You can turn that on if you would like closed captioning. At the end, we'll be giving away a $25 gift card at random to the people who stay through the duration of the presentation. Must be present to win. And again, at the end of the entire session for today, we'll be giving away a Microsoft Surface Go 2. So fill out the survey, which can be found at this link or by taking a picture of this QR code. Again, don't fill out the surveys till the very end because we don't want 100 submissions per individual. And lastly, I'd just like to thank our sponsors who make these type of events and giveaway possible, being Microsoft, Concurrency, Now Micro, Cyber Advisors, RBA, and Arctic Wolf. Huge thanks to these guys for providing fiscal sponsorship for this and affording us the ability to keep bringing you these events virtually and hopefully eventually back in person. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn this over to Kent, who's got a great presentation for all you. Again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or type them in the chat. Kent, go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and if I could just get an acknowledgement that everyone can see my screen. All right, sounds good. So as mentioned, my name's Kent Weare. I'm a Principal Program Manager lead on the PowerCat team at Microsoft. So PowerCat stands for Customer Advisory Team. We're an engineering group based out of Redmond, Bellevue, Washington, and are focused on working with strategic customers on unblocking them while adopting emerging technology. Now, the areas I focus on are robotic process automation inside of Power Automate, and then also our conversational chatbot experience in Power Virtual Agents. I am based out of Calgary, Canada, so I'm quite familiar with the weather that you folks are likely experiencing in Minnesota as well. So we've got that in common. So in terms of agenda, here's what we've got planned for today. And as mentioned, I will be taking some natural breaks as we transition from these different sections. And this is, feel free to go ahead and add any questions that you might have along the way, and we'll take a look and go through them at that point in time. Now, what I will start off is an introduction to Power Virtual Agents. So there may be some of you folks that are new to this technology, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on demos, and the demos will largely be related to Microsoft Teams and PVA, and essentially the integrated experience that we've recently rolled out at Microsoft. Then in the third section, we're going to talk about a brand new feature called Bot Framework Composer integration. And this is the ability to take Bot Framework Composer capabilities and plug them into Power Virtual Agents, and I'll explain why that is important. And then lastly, we'll close up with just a little bit about Power Virtual Agents governance and some of the new capabilities found in the Center of Excellence Starter Kit that allow you to discover chatbots and actually monitor or meter the chatbots in your tenant from a tenant perspective as well. All right, so with that said, we'll kick off into a bit of an introduction on PVA itself. Now, this might sound a little bit buzzworthy, but there is some truth to this, right? I like to say that innovation doesn't happen while people are standing in a line, waiting for a small group of experts to be able to go ahead and service their needs. Now, when we think about the Power Platform all up, and certainly Power Virtual Agents is part of that, really what we want to be able to do is democratize who can build out these solutions. And through that democratization, we can actually allow organizations to scale and transform. And so transformation, is just as much about the people transforming as it is about technology, but there is a good fit from that perspective. Now, just in terms of terminology, let's just talk about what is a bot. And you can essentially think of a bot as a software application that will go ahead and be programmed to perform specific tasks. And oftentimes it is there to mimic or imitate the actions that an end user would typically perform. And this is really the goal when we talk about chatbots, is that ability to go ahead and to scale the organization through deflection. And the idea is that you can provide self-service experiences to end users or to customers, and then free up other humans to focus on more creative work as opposed to mundane, repetitive, mechanical work itself. And really, this is the opportunity to really leverage bots from that perspective. Now, when we talk about bots, depending upon, I hear this every day on both sides of the fence here, but I thought it was just worth calling this out. We do have RPA bots, so robotic process automation, where you would typically go ahead and record the actions that an end user would typically be taking. So I'm entering data in this specific application. I click on the tab button. I enter more information. I might hit the next button, fill out more information, click save. If those are very repetitive and consistent activities, we can go ahead and record them in the form of an RPA bot and then replay them back and pass in new inputs in order to drive UI screens. Now, what we're going to be focusing on today is really conversational chatbots. And so this is where we will have a customer or an end user converse with a bot, and we will use artificial intelligence to understand what is the intent that end user or customer is trying to accomplish or achieve. Then what we'll do is we'll respond with a series of additional questions or actions in order to better understand their needs and then be able to address their needs as well. And so what you can think of Power Virtual Agents is, it's kind of like a workflow tool in the sense that you will model what does a conversation workflow look like. And then we can tap into artificial intelligence and what's known as natural language understanding in order to understand the intent of that user to better route their conversations. Now, it doesn't always end here. Bots are not perfect. I'm certainly not trying to sell that. But what we can also do with this technology is go ahead and escalate a conversation to an end user or what's known as a live agent when the bot gets stuck. And so that becomes essentially the best of both worlds, where you can provide some level of deflection and keep our humans, productive, focusing on other things, but when absolutely necessary, bring them into the conversation because they're going to address a use case or a scenario that a bot wasn't able to do on its own. Now, when we think of Power Virtual Agents, it is part of the Power Platform. It was introduced late last year in general availability. I guess you would say it's the newest member of the family, and it fits in really well. So if you think about Power Platform, its role is how do you democratize essentially solution building, whether it's apps, automations, or dashboards. How can you lower that barrier of entry so that more people can participate in that ecosystem? Now, what also makes this platform very unique and powerful is its ability to integrate with those other services. And Power Virtual Agents is no different. Power Virtual Agents, or PVA, you might hear me call it, does integrate with Power Apps. So we can go ahead and embed essentially a chat widget as part of our Canvas app. Or we can go ahead and embed our chat canvas in with a Power Apps portals experience, or even SharePoint for that matter as well. And so we can do that deep integration from that perspective. Then on the Power Automate side, it's an even better situation, and we're going to see this a lot in the demos today. We can use Power Automate as a way to extend our chatbot capabilities. And so what this means is we can use the 400 plus connections that exist inside of Power Automate in order to tap into those systems as well and have them participate in our chatbot conversation. Because when we talk about chatbots, we typically start with, frequently asked questions and servicing up information. But where the real value comes is if you can displace those activities completely by transacting with those systems, that's where you're going to achieve even more value from that perspective. Because if you're asking me a question about, where can I fill out my timesheet, and I give you a link yeah, that might have saved you some time trying to find that or discover that. But if I can just say, oh, just fill out your timesheet while you're here, then the task is done, and you're not actually, context switching as much as well. And really, this is where the opportunity with Teams really shines, right? Naturally, we are positioning Teams as that remote worker platform, and there's so much integration and goodness that comes inside of Teams. Now we can leverage the Power Platform even more and keep people focused on their activities in Teams, but really give them all of these different extensibility points to tap into the broader ecosystem itself. Now, when we talk about Power Virtual Agents, here is the experience that you can see. If this is the first time that you've seen this before, it does look like a workflow, right? I'm going to go ahead and construct a conversation, and we can see this live debugging experience that takes place here. Now, chatbots are nothing new. Microsoft's been involved in chatbots for several years. The Azure Bot Framework is a framework that's been used to help developers build these chatbots, and it is quite rich, and it has its own extensibility capabilities as well. Now, what is a little bit different is between what's offered there and what we provide is that when you're building bots, there's some coding that's required. Like you do need to be a developer. You do need to understand all of the intricacies of the framework to build an actual chatbot solution.
Michigan by 10,000.
But what we can do is essentially use like drag and drop experience in order to go ahead and to build out these chatbot experiences. So we can take advantage of the power of the bot framework, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But what we can do is democratize who can build those bots. And I think that's the important concept here is that regardless of where you're at from a technology spectrum in terms of your comfort, you can go ahead and build these chatbots. And there's also the opportunity to collaborate in what we call a fusion dev team in order to, bring, pro developers into the picture and build part of the solution, and then rely upon essentially subject matter experts who might be more familiar with the content to better service the bot. And just one example, we do work with an NFL team in the AFC, and they've built out a chatbot experience. And what they were able to do was they were able to go ahead and use that fusion dev approach, where they did have essentially someone in IT that was familiar with Dynamics and had built out the chatbot and had the solution working and the ALM working across environments. And then what they did was they handed over the keys to the customer support team, because they were the people that were dealing with customers around ticket requests, parking requests, everything that's going on with COVID. And they're in a better position to build the bot in the language that their customers are used to using, more so than someone who's primarily focused on technology itself. Now, I did mention that Power Virtual Agents is built on top of the bot framework, and it really is standing on the shoulders of giants. So if we think about this pyramid, we are leveraging a lot of existing investments inside of Microsoft already to build and provide Power Virtual Agents. So it starts with Azure and their cognitive services. So naturally, we are a SaaS service. We run in Azure under the hood. You don't need to manage the subscription. It runs in a Microsoft subscription. And all of the AI is coming from essentially Azure AI and all of the investments that Microsoft Research has made in those areas. So for example, the natural language understanding. Then on top of that is we're leveraging the bot framework in terms of all of the communication channels that take place as part of chat conversations. And this is part of the reason why we can take a bot framework skill and plug it into our Power Virtual Agent, and also why we've now got rich integration with Bot Framework Composer that we're going to talk about here in a little while. As mentioned, we're part of the Power Platform, so that gives us the first-class capabilities in terms of solution packaging, support for environments, a consistent role-based access control plane, and then all of these different connectors that we see here on the right-hand side. So whether you're in Office, the Azure ecosystem, or even third-party ecosystem, we have the ability to extend our chatbots with these connectors. On top of that, if there's a connector that you're missing, you can go ahead and build that connector through a custom connector experience as well. Once again, as part of the Power Platform, you can re-leverage all of these assets across your apps, your dashboards, your automations, and now your chatbots itself. Now, in terms of the chatbot lifecycle, what's really important to think about here is that a chatbot is not your typical IT project, right? You know, to say that you've got a start date and an end date is setting yourself up for failure, right? You can think of it as phases, but the idea with a chatbot is you're generally never done. And what that means is that you're going to learn from your customers or your end users about how they want to converse with a chatbot. And then it's in your best interest to look at those signals and then go ahead and iterate or tweak your chatbot to better service them. Because let's be honest, service. Now, how can you go about so? It all starts with our maker portal. So powerva.microsoft.com, where you can go ahead and create a chatbot. Then what you need to do is you need to be able to go ahead and build out your topics, your conversations. And so this is where we're over here in this box. And something that we can do to accelerate the topics that we want to bring in to our chatbot is we can use a feature called suggested topics, which allows us to point at essentially an FAQ that's publicly accessible and to be able to ingest all of the content of that frequently asked questions artifact. And then what will happen is we'll build out all of the related topics. Now we can choose to enable these topics, delete these topics, modify these topics, and really helps build out sort of the scaffolding of that bot quite quickly. We also have the ability to go ahead and just author our own topics. We can start from scratch, and we will use the natural language understanding and what's called a trigger phrase in order to kick off a specific conversation. On top of that, we do have essentially variables, which are populated whenever you ask a question. So if I want to ask you, what do you want for lunch? I can provide a series of options of like, okay, it could be, vegetarian or sushi or barbecue or whatever. I can capture that response in a variable. And naturally, I can use those variables for a lot of different things. One of them being passing it off to other systems. And that's where our extensibility really comes into place here with Power Automate. This slide's a little bit dated, Microsoft Flow. And then also the bot framework, whether that's skills or our new bot framework composer experience. So what I can do, and we'll see this a lot in the demos, is expose inputs on my Power Virtual Agent trigger. And what we can do is pass the variables that are captured through our conversation and include them in our flow so that we can then use that data in downstream interactions itself. Naturally, we do have the ability to go ahead and use a test harness or test canvas in the product itself. And once we've gone ahead and tested our solution, we can go ahead and publish it. And there's a wide variety of channels that we can publish to, both external and internal. Certainly, we do see customer-facing chatbots where people will essentially embed an iframe in their external website. Or we can also see Teams. Teams is a very popular location for our internal chatbots. And so there's a wide variety of different channels that you can go ahead and publish your chatbot to. In the most cases, you're able to leverage all of your existing investments. There's some nuances with Teams in some areas, but in general, you're able to leverage this content regardless of where you're publishing it. Analytics, and this is where you've gone ahead and basically published and made it available to your end users or customers. You can determine whether or not people are satisfied through like a customer satisfaction survey that's included. You can see, are people being able to resolve their questions through the chatbot, or do we have high abandonment rates? And that means someone has essentially closed down the chat widget and basically ignored the bot because they obviously weren't happy. So once we get these signals from our out-of-box analytics, we can therefore go back, tweak our bot, and make it a more enjoyable experience itself. Now, just to double click on a few of these features that I just mentioned, so we've got suggested topics, right? Here we're providing a publicly addressable URL. Now, something that has recently happened is you can now include PDF, Word docs, or CSV files as part of this experience. They do have to be publicly accessible, but in the not so distant future, we'll give you an opportunity to directly upload them into the service. So that is something to be looking for. We do have the ability for what's called slot filling capability. So we're going to see an example later on where I might be asking you multiple questions. But if me as an end user start the conversation and already include that information that you're about to ask me, why would I want the chatbot to ask again? And so that's what's called slot filling. And in this case, they're using the example of what city do you live in. So instead of me prompting you to say, what is your city? If I go ahead and say, show me whatever movie theaters in Calgary, it won't ask for me to provide my city because I already gave it to the chatbot, and it'll go ahead and store it. And so that's a pretty compelling and powerful feature as well. We've talked a little bit about channels, so I won't go into this in more detail, but is a closer look at the channels that are available for you today. And then here's a better look at the analytics that are provided out of the box. Now, on top of these out of the box analytics, we do store the chat transcripts that you would normally find in the sessions tab inside of, I was going to say the Common Data Service, CDS, which is now Microsoft Dataverse. So we do have an entity there that you can actually go ahead and use Power BI to consume that information as well if you want to do some additional reporting yourself. But this is what you'll find out of the box, and will give you insights in terms of how well your bot is performing. Here, if you've got a low resolution rate, it's probably a signal that you need to go ahead and tweak it. If you've got a high escalation rate because you've integrated Power Virtual Agents with a live agent system like Dynamics Omnichannel, then that might be another scenario of, well, why are they always escalating? Are there more self-service topics that we can include instead? And then same thing with your SAT. If it's low, people aren't enjoying the experience. You might want to look at how you can provide a better experience itself. And then this speaks to the point just around extensibility and being able to act. Not just surface up information, but how can you transact on behalf of that user as well? And here what you can see, you can have many different conditions or swim lanes as part of your conversation with your end user, but how can you then go ahead and reach out to external systems in order to fetch content or essentially create content or create transactions in those downstream systems. On top of it, we do have support for end user authentication. So this is kind of where it depends where you want your bot to live. There's some cases where you will publish your bot externally and you don't want to authenticate because you're dealing with frequently asked questions for a citizen. We do have a lot of government use cases. Or it could be internal and you want to ensure that your bot is being used by authenticated personnel, and as a result we can plug in Azure Active Directory and have it authenticated from that perspective. And then on top of that, we've got even better authentication mechanisms with Microsoft Teams, so we can also be authenticated as part of those interactions, essentially for free without any plumbing required. And I'll show you that a little bit later as well. So with that said, now we'll shift more into the built-in capabilities with Microsoft Teams. But any questions so far about Power Virtual Agents in general? Also feel free to put in the chat your experience level with Power Virtual Agents if this is brand new for you, or if you've got a lot of experience, and I'll do my best to tailor the content to your experience level as well. Okay, we'll get moving. We'll keep moving, but feel free to add questions as we go along as well. So naturally, what we want to talk about here is Teams. We're talking about M365 at this event, and really there's a lot of synergies across Microsoft Teams and the Power Platform itself, right? So we do see Microsoft Teams as the platform for teamwork. We've naturally got a lot of capabilities around collaboration and chat and meetings, but how can we go ahead and extend all of those capabilities, those interactions with the Power Platform? The Power Platform is gaining in popularity. You can see it's used by 97% of the Fortune 500. And how can we go ahead and plug in these experiences with Teams and really allow people to focus on getting work done instead of context switching all of the time? And so even before these recent investments and announcements, I've always been a big fan of being able to pin a dashboard inside of a team or pin an app inside of a team, because why do I want to go find it somewhere else? If I'm working or spending a good part of my day in Teams, which I'm sure most of you folks are doing as well. So introducing Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. I'm sure this has been talked about at great length today, but essentially what we're providing you is Power Platform experiences that are native to Microsoft Teams, and also giving you some additional capabilities that you would typically find in the Power Platform all up. Previously, we did have the Common Data Service, which has now been repositioned as Dataverse, but as part of that, we do get capabilities for tables. I know I'm probably going to use these terms interchangeably. I've been used to saying entities for many years, but essentially the ability to use like a robust storage facility for storing data. So we can go ahead and create tables itself. And then also there's a simple deployment model as well with these solutions. You don't necessarily have to be as familiar with all of the sort of Dynamics solution packaging or CDS solution packaging that we've previously used. There's a seamless experience around Teams, and then also governance provided through administrators as well. Now, when we think about Dataverse, really it is a team sport. We do see this as an opportunity for citizen developers, for IT developers and pro developers to all be able to bring their solutions and take advantage of the surface area that exists inside of Teams in order to leverage all of those users that are those millions of users, tens of millions of users that are using Teams every day. How can we actually go ahead and build experiences for them as part of that remote worker platform itself? Now, what's involved in installing Power Platform solutions? Here's just a very quick animated GIF that shows you that. Once essentially someone's built a solution and published it and it's been vetted by your admin, you have the ability to go ahead and just install it. And it's that simple of being able to click a button to go ahead and install it itself. It's not a complicated process, and it's certainly one that Microsoft is continuing to streamline itself. Now, what's the advantage of having support for embedded low-code applications and solutions? Well, number one, it's simple to build, right? So this is an opportunity for people that may not have development experience to go ahead and build some of these solutions. And sometimes it's through a solution template itself. So there's some templates that exist today. There'll be more and more coming as time goes on as well. And those are great places to get started and to help building yourself. Deployment is naturally something that is streamlined or simpler than it has been in the past. And also a smooth mobile experience to help serve frontline workers, which is typically a challenge as well. And then naturally, governance, I'm sure has been talked about at this event as well, but seeing more and more of those investments so that IT administrators can manage this more holistically. So let's now talk a little bit more about Power Virtual Agents inside of Teams itself. So how this works is you go ahead and you install the Power Virtual Agent essentially application. And when you do so, you are now going to have essentially the Power Virtual Agents authoring experience hosted inside of Teams. Now, one of the benefits of doing this naturally is cost, right? So as part of your M365 license entitlement, you get Power Virtual Agents as part of this. Now, there are some limitations in terms of the connectors or features that you can use, but when you're talking about trying to automate or build chatbots in the context of M365, there's no additional cost for you to go ahead and do that. And so when you are authoring these solutions, it'll always be inside of Microsoft Teams. We continue to have our other portal at powerva.microsoft.com. Those would be for essentially the tenant-wide licensing or the consumption-based licensing that we provide as part of that service. And that's going to extend some additional capabilities for you, like premium connectors, some entitlement for Dataverse, bot framework composer integration, and then also the ability to go ahead and expose those bots externally. Naturally, when you're in this mode, you are building a bot for Microsoft Teams and for use only in Microsoft Teams itself. Now, another benefit of using this approach is the configuration-free way to authenticate with Teams users. And this is great, right? Previously, if you wanted to tap into essentially a corporate authentication provider like Azure AD, there's some configuration that has to take place as part of that. You also need to be prompting for credentials and getting a code and copying and pasting. And that's now gone, right? That's part of this experience where we can now go ahead and authenticate. We've also included a couple actions or attributes that are now available, so you can see who is, and just reducing some of the friction that would have been there previously as now we're embedded inside of Teams itself, and then naturally the ability to make our bot available to end users as well. So here's just a look at the overall architecture itself. We naturally have Microsoft Teams, the platform, and then what we've got is Microsoft Dataverse, and that includes the tables themselves, but also the environments. And so what happens is that we are provisioning environments under the hood to support the runtime of these applications. You could kind of think of it as perhaps a slimmed down version of the environment itself, just because there's some features that you're not going to have access to. But you are able to take advantage of many of those capabilities, such as a relational database for Teams users. This was something that you wouldn't have had before, or you would have had to have premium licensing in order to go ahead and to leverage. Okay, so let's now talk a little bit about demos, and let's get our hands dirty with the tool and get out of slides here for a little bit. Now, one of the scenarios I thought of that would be applicable to this audience is you've all been on these projects, enterprise projects, IT projects, business projects, and there's always this a series of documents or information that you want to be able to access, and it's always a pain to go ahead and find them. What if we started to collapse that experience around a chatbot, and we could actually use a chatbot as a way to interface or to basically interact with some of these activities that you would typically be performing? So one example is getting the org chart. Well, where is that org chart? It's always buried somewhere. But what if I would go ahead and just create a topic that includes a link to that org chart? Then I can quickly access that piece of information. Same thing with project rosters, right? So generally you have some sort of roster of all of the people that are on your project. You might want to be able to catalog what is their role, maybe what time zone they work in. Certainly there's a lot of remote worker scenarios right now. People might have different schedules. What is their email address? What is their skills or their expertise? So that's something we can tap into. What if we want to provide a consistent way to go ahead and log a planner task? So planner is a great tool when people use it, but it's always a matter of like, am I using the right planner? Now I need to go log into another tool. I need to go find these things. What if we could just tap into that from a chatbot? And then lastly, another, a simple example could be just being able to capture some meeting minutes. And how can you go ahead and do that through a chatbot and an adaptive card? So that's what I want to show you here, and let's spend some time in the tool itself and get some experience with Power Virtual Agents inside of Microsoft Teams. So I'm in Teams for now. I'm just in the web version just because I'm in a different tenant than my Microsoft one. And I've gone ahead and already installed the Power Virtual Agents application. That's what we see here pinned on the left-hand side. I've gone ahead and I've created a chatbot. And in this case, I just call it the Project Phoenix chatbot. I could go ahead and create new chatbots. When I go and do so, I will be asked to essentially link it to a team and have it join my team. So I started off by creating a Project Phoenix Microsoft team, and now I'm able to go ahead and join that team using the chatbot itself. And so that's what I've done ahead of time. Once I go ahead and click on this chatbot, I'm going to see an experience that looks pretty close to what I would typically see inside of the Power Virtual Agent portal itself, right? So here's a look at the Power Virtual Agent portal. If I go to the main screen, I see all of these different topics. I have my test harness, and I have my left navigation for things like analytics, channel security, etc. Inside of Teams, I see a similar experience. I've got the left nav here that's just collapsed, and I have the ability to go ahead and view and discover all of my topics. Now, when we talk about topics, there's typically two types of topics. One is a system topic and one is a user topic. Now, let's start with system. So these are represented by this little gear around the messaging icon, and these are provided by Microsoft. And so what we want to do is just reduce that redundant actions that you would typically have to perform every time you create a chatbot. And for example, where we've got common scenarios like a greeting. So we don't want you to have to go create this every time you create a chatbot, which is essentially our greeting topic. So if I walk up to this bot and I say hi, essentially I want the bot to basically respond back to me. Now I can modify all of the messages that show up when I go ahead and call this. I can't change the trigger phrases, at least not right now, but this is how I would go about greeting someone who just approached my bot. And so this is something that exists out of the box as part of a system topic. Now, when we talk about a user topic, that's something I can go ahead and create myself. So I've got the 4 different scenarios that we've talked about before, and I can go ahead and create a topic. In this case, it's going to be for getting the org chart. Now, in order to start this conversation, what I'm looking for is an end user to go ahead and use a trigger phrase that's somewhat similar to this. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same wording as this, but the intent or the meaning should be the same. And this is where that natural language understanding comes into place, because the chatbot should try to understand what I'm trying to request and then detect that and then route it appropriately. Now, we do suggest you start with 5 to 10 diverse phrases. So, I should add a few more here. It's also important that I don't use a lot of these same phrases in other triggers, because that will lead the engine to go try to interpret what is the right, essentially, a topic that you're trying to call. And that could result in a prompt where the engine goes back and says, which one are you looking for? I'm seeing some similarities. So that's something you want to be very careful with when you're constructing your trigger phrase itself. Now, once I've established my trigger phrases, I can go ahead and build out my conversation or my topic. Now, what I've got here is just a simple message that's going to return a message that says, here's a link to the org chart. I've included a link, essentially, in this case, it's to my Word document that lives inside of essentially SharePoint, but it is part of my team, files inside of Teams. And I can also provide the user display name. Now, this is part of the benefit of using Power Virtual Agents inside of Teams, is that this comes for free. I don't have to go ahead and do any additional work around authentication. I can see the display name and the user ID, and I just have access to it because Teams has already gone ahead and authenticated me. Now, let's go ahead and let's just give this a run. So I can go ahead and say, show me org chart. And this topic will kick off. And now I have a link. I can go ahead and click on the link. And it's a very simple example of me being able to refer to content that might be frequently accessed. So just give this a moment to render. But I essentially have an org chart that's now available to me. So a very simple hello world example, but just speaks to some of the sort of capabilities that you can take advantage of. Now, I'm getting prompted here. Did this answer your question? You might be going like, okay, well, this is annoying, but this is actually really important. And this helps feed our analytics. Because if someone is saying, yes, that did answer my question, that is going to contribute to my resolution rate, which will help me determine whether or not I'm on the right path with building out my bot. Now, if I say no, I'll get prompted to basically provide another statement or have another kick at the can per se to go ahead and provide another statement that can be essentially interpreted as well. The other thing you saw here is this now shows up as being green, and it's essentially following the breadcrumbs. So as I'm going through this test harness here, I can go ahead and see basically what path is being taken. Now, this is a very simple example, but we can include things like conditions and branching, ask more questions, get more responses, and these workflows can start to be more involved. But seeing this green, basically, UI touch happening, I can go ahead and basically see exactly the path that my conversation took. So let's go and get to, say, the next level, right? We're sort of increasing in terms of our complexity here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and find what is the project roster. So once again, I define my trigger phrases. I can then provide just a message. It's a good practice to say, hi, so-and-so, welcome to the bot. I'm going to now give you the project team members. And this is also important as well. Whenever I have a call to another system, we're going to see a little bit of latency. So it's always good to provide a message back so that the end users know that, hey, the bot is working. In this case, I'm going to call out to a flow, and I'll show you the flow here shortly. But this flow is going to go ahead and connect into SharePoint and retrieve details about my project roster, and then we're going to go ahead and display that to our end user. So if I can go ahead, I can just say that acknowledge that was previously successful. Here I am getting a prompt, and I can go ahead and provide a rating, and that will contribute to my CSAT scores as well. So here I'm just going to type in project roster. And now what has happened is we've gone out to SharePoint, we've retrieved the information, and now I'm just displaying it back to the end user. And so what you can see is I have some ability to do some formatting. So I've got bold, I've got italics, I've got links, and this is a result of using Markdown inside of the Power Automate flow that we do have. Now, where did this information come from? So if I head back to my team, we've got our Files tab. So that's where we found the org chart document. We've got our project roster, which is essentially a list of information. And so what we're going to do is have our flow be able to connect to this list and then basically return back that information to our end user. So let's go to the first one. Here is our flow. We've got a Power Virtual Agents trigger. Now, in this case, we didn't have any inputs, but we can. We're going to see that in the next example. I've just got a simple variable here that's going to be of type string, and I'll show you why here soon. We're going to go out and connect to our SharePoint site and retrieve values from our project roster. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loop through each row that's returned as part of that project roster call. And this is where I'm going to go ahead and use Markdown. And so I'm going to append the value to essentially my string, which is project roster. And I can use Markdown syntax like double star for bold. I can use the backslash, which means new line. And I can also take advantage of a single star, which is italics. And so that's how I can go ahead and improve some of the formatting capabilities inside of Power Virtual Agents. I'll then go ahead and then return that response, that single string, back to the chatbot. And then it will be displayed here, and I start to get some richer formatting from that perspective. So that's scenario number 2. Now let's go ahead and let's check out our third use case. Our third use case is where we have Planner, and we want to be able to go ahead and log a specific task. Now, as part of this task, we're going to have a series of questions that have to be asked. So, the name of the task, when it's due, email address of who we want to assign that task to. So what we can do when we ask questions is we can actually establish essentially the data type that the answer belongs to. Now, in this case, I'm using user's entire response. And so what that means is we're going to go ahead and basically store that as text. Basically, whatever you put in, we're going to go ahead and store it back. It's essentially a string. Now, when we get to the next one, we can go ahead and store when this task is due. Naturally, a date and time would be a good fit from that perspective. So what we'll do is use the date and time entity as our type. And when we store it, we will store it essentially as a date and time. Now, the value that this provides, other than having good data, is that if someone goes and puts some nonsense in when I ask for the date, like I say orange, it's going to come back and says, that's not a date. Please provide a date. And so that allows us to avoid a lot of like these, client-side validations or if else or, to make sure that people are providing valid data as inputs. Same thing with email. There's a pre-built email, and I can go ahead and use this. And if I say, what is your email address, and I put 10, it's going to come back and say, sorry, that's not recognized as an email itself. And so once again, these are some of the little things that really contribute to bot building that are really important. The other thing to note, naturally, we can go ahead and rename these variables, but we can also determine its scope, or what we call here usage. Now, when I go ahead and use a variable inside a single topic, and I leave its scope as, to the topic level, I can't use that variable anywhere else inside of my chatbot, only within that topic. But if I flip this and I switch it to bot, it's kind of like a global variable. So if I, on another topic, need to get the end user's email, I can go ahead and prompt them again naturally. But prompting someone for information twice in the same session is not a good user experience. So by declaring it as a global variable, what happens is if it already is asked previously and I want to use it again, I don't have to reprompt the user for that. It's automatically going to be there, and I have access to it, and I don't have to reprompt the end user for it. So that's a nice feature as well. The other thing you can do is if you want to expose the capability to pass in a variable from an external tool like your website, you can also tick that box, and it essentially can be passed in as a query parameter. And when we do that, we also won't reprompt you for it as well. So for example, you're shopping and you are basically, say, looking at shoes. And as part of that web page, you're looking at, say, size 11, Nike Air Jordans. So why would I transition you to a chatbot and then ask you again for what shoes you're looking for and what size? If I know that on the web page, I can actually inject those as query parameters, and then I won't have to ask you as part of my chat conversation. Once again, just reducing the friction when you are interacting with your users. Now, in this case, I have my Power Automate flow. Now, I can go ahead and create a new flow by clicking on Call an Action, and then here I'm going to get prompted to create a new flow. What will also happen is it will discover any flows that are in the current environment that are part of a solution that I have access to will show up in this list, and I can choose to go ahead and add it. When I do go ahead and add it, it will detect what are the inputs that flow is looking for. So in this case, we have task name, description, assigned to, and due date. So as a result, I need to go ahead and pass in parameters for that. And that's where we see these boxes here. If I go ahead and click this, I will see any of the parameters that have previously been basically populated or established. We'll then go ahead and call out to that flow, and then we can just provide the response. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll just say add task. And then now we're going to get prompted for these questions. We can say it's review business requirements, and it's due on the 25th. And then we will provide who it is assigned to. So we've gone out, we've called Planner, and this is just to prove that it's working, but this is essentially the ID that Planner has returned back to us. And so that just is a signal that this actually has worked properly. Now, if we head over to our flow, in this case, the flow is actually quite simple. It's simpler than our other one. But we are going to take advantage of those inputs, right? So this is where we're defining inputs. This is where we're using those inputs as part of our call to Planner itself. And then we can go ahead and provide that response. Now, once again, if I head over to our team, I can go look at project tasks, and I can go ahead and see that that task was recently created. So I was doing some testing here before, but here we'll see that I believe it was one of these two, but we can see that it has actually been created itself. So that's some automation that's part of, once again, with Power Automate, we can tap into all of these different use cases and scenarios. Now, the last demo that I'll show here is related to creating meeting minutes. And this one is where it's going to get even a little bit more complex as well. So in this case, we're going to have our trigger phrases of record a meeting, create meeting minutes, and then we're going to just capture some inputs. In this case, it's going to be a user ID. And what we'll do is provide an immediate response back indicating that, okay, this process has started. Now, what's going to happen behind the scenes, though, is when we call this flow and we pass in the user ID, we will send in an acknowledgement back to the chatbot, because chatbots will time out. You can't have, it's running over HTTP. You can't have long running sessions with a chatbot. So this idea of having a prompt that says capture all your meeting minutes that could take half an hour isn't going to work in this case with a chatbot request response scenario. So what we do is we acknowledge back to the user saying, yep, I've started your meeting, and then look for an adaptive card. I'll then go ahead and send an adaptive card to that user. So this is the user ID that was passed in. And then we will wait for the response. Once I get the response back, I'm just doing some formatting here so that when I go ahead and take those meeting minutes, I can put them into OneNote and have them formatted properly. And then lastly, what I will do is I will post a message to the channel, the Project Phoenix channel, indicating that the meeting minutes have been published, and provide the URL where people can go ahead and explore that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So quickly we see basic acknowledgement. Now I have my adaptive card that's being provided to me. I can now say the title of the meeting. Can indicate who is in attendance. And then just a summary. We'll then go ahead and click the submit button. And that's when this flow now is executing basically this branch here, right? So we've ended our chat session. That chat session's done. But this flow doesn't mean that this flow is done either, right? It'll continue to work and wait for basically the response from the adaptive card. So if we head back over to our team and we head over into the general chat, we'll see I'm in Mountain Time Zone. So just a minute ago, basically we posted the fact that our meeting minutes have been published, and we can go ahead and click on that link inside of OneNote and be able to go ahead and review those notes. Now, there's a couple limitations I would say with OneNote and the OneNote connector is I can't provide a title, so I would have to go ahead and to provide that title myself. The other thing is these little quotes as well. But otherwise, we would have all of that information stored inside of our OneNote notebook, and once again have it all centralized. Naturally, I can go ahead and pin this as well, and would see it inside of my team itself. So I guess with that said, with those demos out of the way, we'll have a few more demos here in a little bit related to bot framework. But any questions about any of the demos that you just saw? Okay, so let's keep moving then. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was Power Virtual Agents and Bot Framework Composer integration. So this was something that was just announced, I guess it was last week, or maybe it was earlier this week. It was earlier this week, and it really provides additional capabilities around extensibility, right? So we've talked about Power Automate as an extensibility option for us to be able to tap into all of these different systems. Now, what we can do with this extensibility is take advantage of richer support for adaptive cards. So I used an adaptive card in the previous demo, but the problem was I had to take you out of chat, right? I had to take you and start a separate conversation using the flow bot, and it wasn't part of our original chat transcript. I can now use adaptive cards as part of that chat transcript itself. Another bonus by using this approach is that in the past we have provided support for calling a bot framework skill. And what you've had to do in the past is deploy that bot framework skill to Azure. And then we provided the ability to integrate that bot framework skill with Power Virtual Agents. But that was not the simplest experience. And you still had that other runtime, right? So you're essentially, having PVA licensing, and then you would have bot framework consumption costs. Now we can get rid of the bot framework consumption costs by being able to take advantage of the composer configuration that you generate and being able to ingest that into the Power Virtual Agents runtime and execute it from that perspective. On top of it, it is solution aware. And so what this means is now you can deploy this bot framework configuration with the rest of your bot. And it's not a fragmented deployment scenario, because that was another challenge before. How you deployed your Azure bot was very different than your PVA bot. And naturally, that would lead to some complexity as well. So what are the benefits of using this new approach is that we really now can go ahead and directly call our bot framework composer essentially executions or dialogues without the need to have a separate runtime. We also have this ability to do this fusion development, right? So with the bot framework composer, it is more of a pro dev tool, be transparent from that perspective. But it could be a situation where you do have your developers in Bot Framework Composer and building out more and more of those executions or those dialogues, but then being able to allow your subject matter expert to go ahead and call and take advantage of those investments itself. So it becomes a team sport in terms of how you develop these bots, but really providing a very rich experience itself. And it's easy to deploy into PVA. It's really a one-click, takes about 30 seconds, and you can push all of your bot framework composer configuration into the PVA bot itself. Now, what's inside of bot framework composer? What do you get? What's the value? So certainly you have more abilities to have dynamic dialogues, and what I mean by that, whenever you have your responses, you have more capabilities on how you want to go ahead and respond back to that user. You can see in terms of like Power Virtual Agents and even Power Automate is you tend to be, it's fairly strict in terms of like your response. You don't have as much agility, and you certainly have more agility in terms of Bot Framework Composer itself. You also have the ability to do dynamic dialogues, event triggers. Those are some of the features we do have in PVA as well. On top of that, we do have the bot framework language generation, taking advantage of some of the pre-built functions that exist. So one is like regex. That's not something that exists inside of PVA, but is something that's found inside of bot framework itself. Adaptive cards, which are naturally a big capability inside of chatbots, inside of bot framework. So we have that ability. We can also take advantage of calling APIs through HTTP. Now, we don't have a rich set of connectors like we see in Power Automate, but if we wanted to call out to an API, we could still go ahead and do so. The other thing is we can share access to variables as well. So we can pass in a global variable from PVA into our bot framework composer as well. So let's go ahead and let's just take a look at a few demos of how this will go ahead and work. Okay, so now what I'm in the main Power Virtual Agent Maker experience, so powerva.microsoft.com, and I've got two different scenarios for you, both related to meals. Now, what we'll do first is we'll go ahead and see what are the meals that are available for delivery. And so if we go into Power Virtual Agents, this very much looks like the similar experience that we've had today that I've shown you so far. There's a little difference here. I'm going to go ahead and essentially redirect to a meals dialog that was constructed using Bot Framework Composer. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to go ahead and type, what meals can I order? I'm going to get prompted for a city. And this is an example of how I'm sharing this variable with the Bot Framework Composer configuration. So I'm going to type in Calgary. And then what we're going to do is now call out to that Bot Framework Composer dialog. And here we can see that it's received that variable properly because it's echoing it back to us. But we now have a richer experience around images that we can provide back to the end user. So here we've got steak, chicken, and tofu. Now, how did that go ahead? How did we go ahead and build that? So this is the Bot Framework Composer tool. So it is a desktop tool that you would go ahead and download. And once you're in Power Virtual Agents, we will provide you a button that allows you to go ahead and to open up Bot Framework Composer, right? So here's where I'm being prompted, open your bot in the Azure Development Tool. And if you don't have it, it's naturally going to prompt you to go ahead and download it. So I'm now in this specific tool. And in this case, I have a dialog, but I don't have a trigger. Because remember, we had the trigger inside of our Power Virtual Agent, right? The trigger was over here. And we controlled the trigger with these trigger phrases from PVA itself. So what we are doing, it's a very simple response back. What we're going to do is just send a response and provide an adaptive card and pass in our city. And so what we'll do is this right now we're in the design experience, but we can go ahead and navigate over to our responses and then go ahead and click on meal delivery. And then, go ahead, click on meals. And then what we're going to do is essentially just return an adaptive card. So this is our adaptive card that does exist. We essentially have some parameters or attributes that are established at the top. And here's where we have those pictures that you saw in the chat experience itself. And so this allows us to go ahead and pass in the location and then return the content itself. Sorry, was there a question?
I don't see any in the chat, Kent.
Okay. Okay, so that's how we would go ahead and this would be essentially your Hello World example inside of the Bot Framework Composer. Now what we can do is take this to the next level. And in this case, what we're going to do is ask for specials. And so here's a situation where we did create the dialogue and the trigger phrases inside of Bot Framework Composer, but when we ingested them, these trigger phrases now show up in this experience itself. And so what happens is when we go ahead and make one of these trigger phrases, we're going to then go ahead and open up that specific trigger inside of the Bot Framework Composer tool. And so this is the experience. I think it's already open, so that might be why it's prompting me. But if I head over, oh, here we go. It's connecting to Power Virtual Agents and ensuring that we've got the right content synchronized. And now I'll be able to go ahead and complete my authoring. I don't want to update it just yet, but what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look at this example. So what we have here is we're focused on daily specials. And so as part of that, here's our dialogue. And as part of our dialogue, we can go ahead and establish a variable. This is essentially an array, which represents all of the different days of the week. Then what we're going to do is we're going to prompt the user. Here we're going to say, please select a specific day, and then give them a user input choice. And here what we're going to do is basically give them all of those days of the week, and we can choose how we want to go about listing them. Here what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say, I want to list them as a hero card. And so what we're going to see when this runs is this is a very nice experience that we can take advantage of compared to some of the options inside of PVA today. Then what will happen is, depending upon what the end user goes ahead and chooses, we are going to respond accordingly. So if we head over to our responses, for our daily specials, we can click on show code. And what we have here essentially is a switch statement. So depending upon the day of the week, because we're essentially going to pass in an index from that array, we will have a case statement. And so what we can see is on Sundays, all tofu meals are 10% off. Over to Friday, what we can see is that 10% off on all meals over $80. And so that's how we can go ahead and configure the logic. So this is an example of more control over your responses. Naturally, you can do this inside of Power Virtual Agents. You will find that you will need a lot of real estate to go ahead and do it. So it is a nice alternative that you can take advantage of. So let's go ahead and let's just run this. And so what we can say is any special deals. And so here is essentially that array that I was talking about, where we have all of the days of the week, and we can now go ahead and choose which day we want to see what the deal is for. Now, what's also interesting about this is some of the feedback that we've had in the past is that people would like to be able to have options displayed vertically. In PVA as of right now, when you do provide essentially multiple choice, it will be displayed horizontally. So this is something that you can relatively easily include in your basically your logic to have now vertical options in terms of being able to call and execute. And so here we can see that we've got 10% off on all meals that are over $80 itself. So that's the demos for Bot Framework Composer. Now, do be aware that this is in public preview. It is something I would expect in the new year, in the not so distant future, this will reach general availability, but I would suggest to go ahead, take a look, and explore what you can do with Bot Framework Composer. And here's some resources to go ahead and to get you started from that perspective. All right, so the last topic that I wanted to talk about today was the Power Virtual Agents telemetry now showing up inside of the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. And so if you're not familiar with the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, it is a tool that is provided by the team I'm on, the PowerCat team, that allows you to provide additional governance and insights in terms of Power Platform development. And so what I'll do here is I'm just going to go ahead and open up the portal itself. And what this is essentially a Power BI dashboard that is able to connect into our CDS or our Dataverse instance, where all of this information is essentially captured itself. And so in this context, it is much more valuable than just Power Virtual Agents. It provides a lot of value for the platform all up. And one of the key benefits of this compared to the admin analytics that are provided to you in the Power Platform Admin Center is that this will look at your entire tenant. And versus those reports over there is they're very specific to an environment. And so what we can do now is look across the entire organization to gain insights. What you're seeing here, I'm essentially in a test tenant, and I'm looking at Power Apps. So I can see all of the apps and flows essentially by environment, right? So we've got all the environments here. I can go ahead and, which much like you would expect in Power BI fashion, go ahead and click on a specific control and see the rest of the dashboard change in order to essentially filter, slice, and dice that from that perspective. Naturally, this works in multiple directions. So here I'm going to focus on, a specific app maker, and I can go ahead and see, where they're making their apps and be able to update the rest of the dashboard itself. We have similar overviews for other technologies like our Power Automate flows. And so here we can go ahead and see similar experiences in terms of where are our flows. Much like Power Virtual Agents, we recently updated the COE Starter Kit to also include UI flows, basically our RPA offering inside of Power Automate as well. And we can go ahead and discover more insights from that perspective. Now, what we all came to see was the chatbots. And so here we can once again go ahead and see our number of environments, and then we can see where our bots are being built, right? So here we've got these different environments, and we can actually go ahead and filter out. We can go ahead and see who's making these chatbots. In this case, I'm logged in as Lydia, so we can see all of the bots that I've gone ahead and built and see where they're being built as well. Now, there's some additional insights as well. Let me just find it here. If we click on the virtual agents, we'll start to see some additional trends. See the total number of bots. Once again, we can filter out by environment. And then what we can also see is the departments that those people belong to. So this is something that is being pulled from Office 365, and provided they have a department displayed, we can go ahead and also include that information here. What we'll see is the creation trend, so when these bots were actually constructed, and then the number of sessions for the bots, and also the number of bot components as well. So it'll give us a sense of how complex our bot is as well. Now, this isn't actively running, so that's why we don't see some updated information related to the last time it was launched or the number of sessions, but this can also help you understand how many sessions that you need, especially if you are on the essentially the premium plan where you have a tenant-wide licensing model itself. But this is a great way to understand who's building bots and where they're building their bots in order to be able to naturally go ahead and govern it. But also when you have people that are doing good things with Power Platform technology, you also want to empower them and encourage them to go ahead and to do more as well. So that is the last piece of content that I did have for you today related to the COE Starter Kit itself. Now I've got one more slide that I'll show you folks, and that is related to just a call to action. So we do have a series of resources that are available to people. One is PVA in a day, so Power Virtual Agents in a day. This is some content that you can go ahead and organize training sessions for your organization, or just do self-paced training where we provide you step-by-step instructions on how you can go ahead and build out chatbots. In the middle section here, we have a YouTube playlist related to a series we're calling Build a Bot. So this is folks from my team, the Power Cat team, where we take tips, patterns, and practices and publish that on the YouTube channel. So go ahead and check that out. We've recently published 3 videos. This is something that's new for us, but go ahead and check that series out. Lastly, the Power Virtual Agents community. So this is something that's been around for a little while, but we've made some additional investments recently into this community. And certainly this is an opportunity to learn from the community and also product team members as well. So this is a great place to get started with Power Virtual Agents and go ahead and ask any questions, and also the ability to share solutions inside of the gallery. So if you make videos or blog posts, you can also contribute at that property as well. So with that said, happy to take any questions that you folks might have as well at this time. Might be on mute.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, my question is actually closely related to this call to action slide. A couple months ago, Microsoft was offering a test or a demo tenant for Power VA and Power Apps for people who didn't have the licensing for it. Is that something they're still offering?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things. So there is trials. So you can sign up as part of a trial. So basically when you log in, you'll get prompted. Now, if your administrator has turned off trials, they have to go ahead and set that up for you inside of M365, but there is the ability to create a viral tenant itself. Now, there was a program in the spring related to COVID that also did include PVA, so the ability to create a chatbot to help address needs related to COVID. Unfortunately, that program is ended, so that's not an option, but certainly you can go ahead and get started for free by signing up for a trial. The other thing you can also do is, inside of Teams now, with it being free, you can go ahead and explore. There will be some limitations in terms of connectivity. You can't take advantage of premium connectors, for example, or the Bot Framework Composer stuff, but you would also have the ability to go ahead and explore and get hands-on experience as well inside of Teams.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'd like to open the questions up to anyone else who has any. Feel free to type them in the chat or come off mute and ask them yourself. Everyone's got the post-lunch hangover. Or food, unless you're doing martini lunches, which I am. Great. Well, Kent, thank you very much for your presentation. I found it very valuable, and thanks again for your support to the user group community.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. For those of you who are staying on this automation track, our 2:30 will be Richard Brittenson talking about the your app is in your teams. I'm going to end the recording on this session, but you can just stay here in this meeting. I will not close it out, and we will resume again at 2:30 with Richard's presentation. To close out the meeting, I'm going to randomize a drawing for the $25 gift card, and it has not failed me yet, so let me run the randomizer. And the winner is Ann Wolf. So Ann, I'll use the email address that you have logged into this meeting with, and you will receive a $25 gift card to your email. If you prefer a different email address to be used, just shoot me a private message and I will get that sent to you. So again, Kent, thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. I will see you at the 2:30.